Ready?
I think so.
We should time it. Ready? One.
One, two, three. We'll get there.
That was almost perfect.
It was very close.
How this is going to go.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you when you're finally joining us for this call, for this podcast, the first podcast episode of Faithful Chaos.
Yes, and Happy New Year, because this is launching on New Year.
Yes. And for those who had hopefully a wonderful Christmas, uh, praying that you guys had a wonderful opportunity of rest and an opportunity to simply spend time with family and other church members throughout the whole time. But here we are.
So I think we should introduce ourselves just if you don't know us.
I think that's a great idea.
Go first.
Oh, I should go first?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jordan Kaptein. I am a minister currently, and I have been doing parts or different parts of ministry for the majority of my life at this point, from VBS programming to participating in VBS, upward coaching, um, and now interning, youth ministry, online ministry, and senior ministry. Um, and so now being a Christian influencer is now part of that resume.
Want to go that far and say that's what we're doing, but okay. And I'm Michele Cutting. I'm his wife. I'm a social worker here, licensed in states. I have done everything from children's services, therapy, to hospice, to hospital social work, and I love what I do. I'm a mom to three boys who are all boy most of the time and keep our lives chaotic. Um, so that's super fun. Uh, I was not raised in the church, but I have been at church since I was about 13, I want to say. And so I've done everything from PBS volunteering to leading Bible studies, organized a 5K high school. That was super fun to raise money to plant church. Um, and now I'm the preacher's wife who helps out on the worship team. So super fun.
Definitely feeling like the Swiss Army knife of ministry couples. We've, if there's a thing within the vocational ministry setting, we've done it at some point, except short-term mission trips. I think that's like the last thing on our little checkbox of things that we want to do.
You know how bad I want to do one too. That would be,
I know.
I mean, I think there's something special about that, like dynamic and that spiritual journey. And I've had so many encounters with so many people and missionaries who aren't short term but long term, and just like the way God moves. And yeah, that's part of my heart. I hope we get at some point in our lives.
Oh, for sure. And it's just one of those things where you're going to notice as we go through more episodes, life can be chaotic, which is kind of part of the focal point of this podcast. Um, we've recognized that life doesn't get easier. Sometimes it gets harder, sometimes it gets better, but a lot of the times it's chaotic. And like she said, raising three boys is a big part of that. In fact, we've got one of them over there who's actively playing with toys.
And it's like 5:30 in the morning, and we're up because we couldn't sleep of the one actively voice. And we're like, it's time to record. We've got to do it. We've pushed this off too long.
And so here we find ourselves, uh, caffeine needing, sleep needing. But hey, we are here because we believe that this is something that we want to do. We believe that this can be helpful and beneficial, not just to us to have these open dialogues with each other, but also in a way that is productive to other believers and hopefully other married couples, even those who were in the dating or courting stage. Today. Definitely. So
So I think you have something for this episode today.
I do.
Yeah.
Speaking of um, relationships in general, um, this started out when I was listening to a podcast, and I can't remember exactly the name of the podcast, and I'm hating myself for that. Um, I was going to do my research, and I totally forgot to do so, so that's totally on me. But
Actor.
it was a podcast, and they were talking about, well, they had viewers sent in their hot takes, I think, on movies and TV shows, because that was what that podcast focused on. And someone mentioned about The Incredibles 2 being a better movie than the original, which I think I agree with their take that the original is ultimately better. This has this has a point in Ministry. I totally I know this sounds like a weird tangent to go on, but this definitely has like precedent for us.
Do you think the original's better?
I
We got
don't
to
know.
start with that. We've got
I know. I
you've
go
got to
back and
tell
forth
me
on
which
it a
is
lot.
better.
I go back and forth on it a lot. I think the dynamic as the family is more interesting in the second movie. Um, Visuals, character usage is better in the second movie. I don't know.
You really just don't want to say the second movie is better, is what I'm hearing. I
I
mean, the
like the scene with the Jack
Jack.
Jack scene.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I mean, that's amazing.
Oh yeah.
Every
I
parent has felt that, especially with the cookies. Like, you want a cookie? Like, just give me a minute.
even even on the metaphorical level, like Jack Jack is the quintessential like understanding of raising a child.
Jack is our youngest. He is
Yes.
L. He is L 100% of the time.
Oh yeah. So yeah, but the whole dynamic of as I was listening to their short conversation, because it was really a Facebook reel, TikTok, YouTube short, however I found it. Um, the the dynamic itself really was interesting to me because they said ultimately it was the same movie, just swapping roles.
Yes and no.
So yeah, to an extent, for those of you who need a quick refresher, in the first Incredibles movie, the superheroes were in hiding because legal stuff, and then uh, Mr. Incredible secretly trains and does superhero gigs like under the table.
Pause. And he hides it from his wife and family.
Does does
And I think that is the major difference between the two is there was like kind of a betrayal there.
that's a good point. I will say that is a quintessential difference between these two in terms of that ultimate role. But if you want to boil it down to its like ultimate basics, it's Mr.
Dad's a
Incredible,
provider.
huh?
Oh, no, go ahead. I interrupted you. That's going to be a problem. I'm sorry, everyone.
Mr. Incredible is doing superhero work to help provide for his family. And then in The Incredibles 2, Mrs. Incredible is doing superhero work to provide for the family.
Elastigirl. Her name is
Elastigirl.
Elastigirl.
Elastigirl. It's both, technically, but um,
But there's also some changing dynamics with like the kids and like finding who they are. And like Violet kind of has a subplot. Like in the first one, the moody teenager. And in the second one, she's like exploring dating and relationship dynamics. I think Dash had a better storyline in the first one. These are the kids, Violet, Dash, and Jack Jack. And in the first movie, Dash wants to do sports, and his superpower is speed. So like, Tim's like, "You can't do it. You'll expose us." And in the end, he's like able to. But it's really interesting in their exploration. But I think that's there's two main differences. I think the first one is the gender swap, right? Mom provider, dad provider. The second one would be, I think, the betrayal. Like, mom is clear and communicative about what's going on, about her job, and she didn't lie to him. And of course, in the second movie, her employer's like the BBEG, right? He's the big bad dude. And when her husband's like, he's the big bad dude, there's like some resentment. from the husband, from Mr. Incredible, about being the stay-at-home dad, and so she dismisses him and
Yeah,
doesn't get to see that.
but there's also more tension in that because considering the fact that up until they had to go into hiding, Mr. Incredible was doing things on his own as a superhero, and then he missed that life so much that he resulted to sneaking around and doing things secretly, not just behind the backs of his family, but the majority of society, so that he can keep doing that. Then, when it became publicly okay again, he had to be a stay-at-home dad where his wife had to go and do the things that he loved to do.
Hot take. Mr. Incredible is not a team.
No,
He's all ego.
right. I'm not disagreeing with that at
Okay.
all.
All right.
But one of the main reasons I wanted to bring this up in particular for this episode, it's mainly talking about family dynamics, um, and how there are times in life where family dynamics change. Um, we see that on a basic level with the Incredibles movies. If you want to boil it down, like taking the moral piece of Mr. Incredible in the first movie, because you do make up a really great point with that. Not make up, you bring a really great point to that.
I invented it out of thin air. It just poof.
um, outside of that, it is a dynamic change. Like the kids grow up, the kids move to a different stage of life. Them as a family move to a different stage of life, but ultimately, in the first movie, Mr. Incredible is the primary provider financially, and then Elastigirl becomes the primary provider financially. I mean,
Yeah.
shoot, her job pays for a new home.
And it's a beautiful, like, I mean, it's one of those like super expensive
Yep.
homes. And I think the Incredibles are set 70s, right?
That's actually a really good point. While you
Like
keep,
like social dynamics, the cars are kind of like that time frame. Dad is typically like the office job. Like that's kind of the vibe it gave. So I want to think 60, 70.
um,
I mean, it's made up world and we're getting into all of this, but yeah.
yeah, retro futuristic version of the first movie,
Look at
and
Michelle be awesome. Social
yeah,
work skills in worse. Like those were very important dynamics. So him not being a provider, like, and again, this is the social worker, not the biblical perspective, but the social worker perspective of that is such a shot to who he is and his foundation as a man and a provider. And like there are these things that I don't think get addressed in society. Now, modern society wouldn't understand that because in most parent households, there's kind of an expectation that both work and like as a woman and a mom, like get judged if you work, judged if you stay at home mom. Like you can't win. And to be honest, internally, you can't win either. Because if you're missing kids' things for work, you feel bad. And in my job, a very special place in work, like sometimes I feel bad when I've got to go home to do something and I'm leaving someone without doing more. So it's a very difficult balance. I don't think modern society really understands that unless you're old enough to remember that time.
yeah, and even the dynamic of being in vocational ministry has that issue as well. Um, Golly, the stories we've heard from preachers' kids and preachers in general, with how easy it is to fall into the trap of being a workaholic as a minister, because a lot of the times ministers do not have clock in, clock outs. They sort of have a fluid work schedule, and so if that means you're in the office for 2 hours because your kids have doctor's appointments or sporting events or things you can do, then you can. But the backside is you still have, hey, I got to be at the office 12 hours today because not only do I got to write my sermon, but I got to go do hospital calls, I got to do home visits, I got to do this, that, and the other. I got to prepare for these types of special services. Next thing you know, your whole schedule's filled and none of it's filled with time with your family.
Yeah. And I do want to preface, I think I'm very blessed by the church that we have helped be part of. They've always been family first, but they've always been amazing in family first ministry of if there's something going on with our kids or if there's something going on with me or that our family care of. And we know people in ministry, churches do not operate in that mentality. And you are there 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, plus the 12-hour Sunday, and they don't have that balance. Some of them are okay with it, and some of them are not. And so, like, I think we've been very blessed, and the congregation's been blessed to be part of. I'm going to work. He's staying home with him. It's fine by me.
Talking about moments of dynamics.
Right.
We're
Oh,
actively between that winter and New Year break. However, there is no rest for your job. You had Christmas off, and that was pretty much it.
yeah. And I'll get New Year's Day off. It's a job. Hospice is. I actually, but I'm really enjoying it. And so, um, I mean, we've gone through different seasons. I think this was part of what you wanted to get at. Like, we have known each other since we were 14.
Junior, maybe my freshman year. Well, okay, no. Um,
Math is.
I mean, you knew more of me while you were in junior high,
I knew
and
of you,
yeah,
know you. But it was really
right,
like gym class my sophomore year, your freshman year
is
is
when
where we
we,
connected.
yeah,
And then 4 years later, we'd get married. 8.5 years later, we're podcasts. But like in that time frame, especially those 8 years we've had so far, had several journeys that have been wild. And I'm sure we'll share most of them. But there was a season worked where we both worked part time, went to school full time. There was a season where I worked full time and went to school full time, worked part time and watched the kiddo, and then went to school and then graduated, right? And then you worked full time, I worked full time. I had John and took time off and then went to grad school. And so you were the primary provider. And then I was working again and then went to school and like home dynamics shifted. And it wasn't until May, like you were working, I wasn't working. Well, I was. I mean, I had a school job, so fine. I enjoyed time. Um, and I didn't renew my contract because I didn't want to do therapy anymore. And I was looking at that hospital, thinking I want to do hospital social work, and I didn't get the job I wanted. And then now we're moving to another state. I got a new job, and we're both back to working full time. Like it's. But one of the things is I've never not felt supported. I think I look back at February of 22 after Elle was born, and I was like, I wasn't doing well mentally, physically, all the things. Like I got you. And again, when I left therapy, I was like, I done therapy for 4 years, and I don't enjoy doing therapy in the setting I'm doing. And you're like, then don't do. I got you. And that was always nice. Like when I wanted to go to school, go to school.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It, it's one of those dynamic pieces where like we were so blessed in that moment to be in a space financially where we didn't necessarily need you to be working. Childcare is expensive, in
Oh my God.
case those of you out there don't know. Um, and one of the weird offsets that started happening is even with her working full time, um, the majority of her bring in was just to help pay for the daycare so that she could work full time.
Well, I think we figured out in between health insurance and the insurance bills and then daycare, I brought home $100 a month, and that was for my lunch and gas to get to work.
Yep. So after we calculated all that and did all the math stuff and realized how ridiculous that was, I was just like, if we're essentially at a net zero with you working because of childcare, then you not going to work, spending time with the kids, and being home, I think is more beneficial as a family dynamic than you working at a job that you hated for,
I didn't
pennies
hate
to the
it.
dollar.
I didn't hate it. I just didn't. enjoy it.
That's fair.
And there's a difference. I think if I was a person who could emotionally disconnect, I would have been able to do it longer. But I'm a social worker and I get into the nitty gritty of people's minds and their lives. And like, I mean, who would want a therapist who was like, gosh. And there were days where I'm like, oh my gosh, and it was not good. And so it's best for my kiddos, honestly. And I worked in a school. I loved my kiddos um, very much. There were several that when I left, I was very glad I knew the therapist. That really mattered to me. But I worked PRN at the hospital, and that's that balance because I could pick up shifts where you weren't working, didn't need childcare, and that made it.
That would have been, I think at this point, the second job position that you've been in where working a thirds was a semi-common thing for you. Um, I've
Yeah.
I've also worked at one point while full-time school, uh, during undergrad, where I worked a position that was a third, and I would essentially tell you good night, go work an overnight shift, and then immediately go to class at an 8 a.m.
Well, and I was working thirds at the same time, and I would take E to work with me. You got to edit that out or bleep his
I'll
name.
make sure.
Uh, I would take E to work with me. And like I remember him laying in the little bassinet while I'm doing med count at 2 in the morning.
To be fair, you were working at a uh
Women's and children's shelter.
yes.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out how to best use
It
that
was also a
verbiage.
rehab. It's a really interesting place and I learned so much there. But I'm sure we'll dive into that another day.
We'll have plenty of stories about that. Um but yeah, there's just moments where the dynamics have changed and they kind of have to at times. You can't always just assume that once you get married, there's a set dynamic within a marriage that it's going to stay that way indefinitely. Till death do us part is this lifestyle.
Right.
Um, it changes a lot because, like you said, um, you've worked, you've done part time, you've done full time, you've done thirds, you've done days. I've worked part time, I've worked full time, I've worked nights. I- It changes. I remember I did a part time ministry gig, and then out of nowhere, we needed to leave, primarily for financial reasons. And then
I
uh,
mean, if you want to give the politically correct answer, financial.
another episode for another day. But then ultimately, I had to go back to a previous job that didn't pay as well, but it was a consistent paycheck that I could get hours in.
Well, and
Uh,
your management there was so amazing.
yes,
And
I
if you're
will.
watching this, we love you still.
That'd be, oh yeah. Um, yeah.
But you lost. I got you off track. I'm so sorry. But
Yeah, you're
there's
good.
been changes. There's been times we've worked two jobs while going to school and like just supporting each other, and not even in the jobs, but in the like life balance of chores at home, of kids at home, of of um after L, I had terrible postpartum depression and anxiety. I stopped working for several months and then like my disability got denied and um like I paid that insurance. um and all of these things and the I still can't imagine because that time frame is such a blur to me of how much work and effort and things you did. And I know it was a lot, but I know there were days I was a bump on a log. Like,
And I think of times when, specifically when I worked that job that where I primarily worked thirds and then turned around and went to class. There were moments where, like you said, you had to uh, take you with you to your job. There were times where I took E with me to school. There are times you took E with you to school. One of my professors, if you are watching this, thank you so much. She
hey,
held she held our firstborn months old in her arms while I was giving a final for a
Yeah,
class.
I had a similar situation, and I think our programs that we went to out in Missouri were just so amazing, and the humans that we encountered there were so loving and kind and considerate. Um, he attended more college classes than any
He
newborn should.
he needs to retroactively have college credits. The amount of
Right,
classes he
honorary
went to,
degree right
he needs an
there.
honorary infant degree
Call
of
Matt Proctor
participation.
right now.
Just call up MSSU, call up Ozark,
I'm
like
not
get
calling him
them.
SSU. They've made some choices, man.
That's that's fair.
I love you, Dr. White. Um, anyway, so
Yeah.
but biblically, like we've seen lots of different marriages, right?
Oh yeah.
My parents are amazing and I love them, but they up until like I became an adult, I didn't know anything about their faith, and I wouldn't say I knew a biblical marriage from them. I don't know that I that now, and I love them. Not saying about them. Like a lot of my biblical marriage role models were people we saw in the church, our senior minister and his wife, our worship pastor or associate. I don't know what his title was. It changed a few times, I think. In my mind, he was the worship guy. I love him. He's amazing. Love his family. And then, I mean, the biggest one was our youth pastor, I
Yep.
think, and their example. And I can tell you that all three of them were so different in their family dynamics and their relationship dynamics. I mean, night and day, a couple of them.
How they presented themselves within a church setting, within a general public setting, and then within a personal at-home setting. But even then, talking about uh, who was our youth minister and his wife, who were big role models for us,
Still are.
still are. I mean, they're peers more now, but still,
Transition was a fun one.
that was. But even then, we've noticed how they interact because of that. Um, and I grew up, like I said, you weren't going to church until you were 13. I grew up in the church. Um, church is somewhat ingrained in my DNA in terms of participation. Um, I, for a while, believed that I was being raised with a stereotypical American Christian home. Um, my dad was a primary factory worker who took his family to church on Sundays. He helped pass the offering plate and communion. He took me and him out to a father son retreat before. Um, he was part of a men's Bible study group for a while. So, up until a certain point, get into that some other day, I think that there was a dynamic where I lived in a stereotypical American Christian
Well,
home.
and I can tell you that when we started dating, I saw dynamics that I associated with some of the ministry families I'd seen. I was like, oh, I saw this, and I know that that was her honoring him, or that was him honoring her. And I can tell you, especially in those early years of us dating, which I think is why when the shift happened, I noticed it so quickly because I saw those things and then I didn't. And then I didn't see them. And they're divorced now. I think,
Yep.
spoiler alert. Um, but like, I, s- and I remember being like, what is happening? And you were oblivious. I
Yeah.
mean, you were oblivious. And I was like, Jordan, something's different. And he's like, no, it's not. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. There's once again, there are so many things that we can tackle in other episodes because it kind of starts going outside of the scope of conversation.
Sorry.
Um, but there is
ADHD.
a part of it where dynamic changed. Uh, to make it super broad about my family, a dynamic shifted. It was a
Sorry, I
very hard
figured
if I
shit.
went ahead and did that, that we could settle in and hopefully, ride this thing out to the end.
Yeah, you're good. I think we're about there anyway. We're getting ready to dive into the Bible.
Yeah, we're getting ready to get into scripture. Is always important when it comes to, especially when it comes to conversations about family dynamics and spouse
Well, and we're
family
talking about a
dynamics.
biblical worldview. I mean, that's the whole point of what we're doing. And I like you told us what we were talking about, and I think we ended up picking the same Bible scripture that we were going to dive in together. You pick Ephesians 5.
Ephesians 5. I did
Yes.
have First Timothy up, which gives similar, but
Ooh.
I think Ephesians 5 does give a pretty clear cut like dynamic. So to kind of help give a quick rundown in terms of like why we're talking about biblical worldview, and
Because we love Jesus.
because we love Jesus. everyone
Sorry.
has everyone has a worldview, right? Everyone has a lens that has been fashioned and shaped for them to see the world, whatever that looks like.
So everyone has a worldview that in even in the social work perspective, we talk about how we all wear glasses or we all wear hats, and that shapes the world around us, and that shapes our morals, it shapes our character, it shapes our values, it shapes what we do day to day. And so having a biblical worldview, actually a little different than a Christian worldview, and the fact that like the biblical worldview is in the end, I'm coming back to the Bible and I'm seeing what it says and how it's going to shape things. And so, looking at marriage, when we do weddings, we teach on Ephesians 5, right? Like that's one of those stereotypical ones the preacher throws in there. That more and more modern people aren't putting it in there. And it's because they don't like the second word in verse 22. And if you're okay with it, I'll go ahead and read 5:22. And I'm just going to read the part for wives and then we'll read the part for husbands if that works for you.
Yeah, go for it. Because I think when it comes to reading Ephesians, the first part specifically about wives, it's fairly well known and
It's
debated on.
it's the part people get grumpy about, in my opinion.
Yes, because
So
I also think they don't read the husband part with it,
yeah, they stop.
but
They stop.
we'll get there.
So context, when we're looking at the Bible, we always want to look at what happened right before. And so right before that, this is Paul writing to the church in Ephesus. By the way, I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm just married to one, so I learn a lot. Um,
That's a that's a that's a big compliment.
yeah, you're welcome.
Calling me a scholar.
I I'm convinced I should have a graduate degree from Ozark from all the ramblings I heard. Sorry. Love you. Um, Ephesians 5, though, before Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus and talking about walking in love, that Christ has loved us and gave himself for us, and therefore we need to walk in love towards others. And then 21 verses later, he is talking to married couples. He's talking to wives and husbands. And he says this. I'm reading from the ESV, because it's my favorite version. What you want. It says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the where the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church and his body. Self, it's now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. We're going to pause there. So that's 23 through 24. Now, I can tell you, my social worker brain doesn't like a lot of those words in there, right? Um, I don't consider myself feminist anymore because of what feminism has kind of shaped, but I think old school feminists I would agree with, right? Like I should be respected and all of those things. Yeah. Um, submission is hard, especially for a strong, independent woman like myself. Like it's something I have to check myself on, is being like, but I can tell you in the same way I struggle to submit to you, I sometimes struggle to submit to God's will. I can own that.
Yeah.
So I guess I do it evenly. I don't know if that makes it better.
I'm at least consistent, if anything.
Right? I mean, I guess if I'm doing it for the Lord, you can take a little bit harder hit. No, sorry.
And, and to kind of keep that in motion, it's the idea of like there are times where you do look to me for decision making, and because I don't know if it's just because my natural independence is just on the lower end, it feels like that there are times where I do struggle to make decisions
Makes
for
me
us.
so mad. Like I want an answer right now.
There's very much times where I do struggle to make those decisions on various things, even if it's something as non-essential as where are we going for dinner if we want
Okay,
to go
but I
out.
think that's every couple. And I think honestly, I don't think when Paul wrote this letter, he's like, you guys are gonna argue about whether you're eating at Olive Garden or McDonald's. Okay? I think I think genuinely this conversation is like, and I think the next part, and I think this is my frustration, is people don't read the next part. And if we just look at that, what you would see, and I know the way Christ led the church, and I think we forget Christ is the head of the church. His body, hold on. Um, the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Um, Now, as the church submits to Christ, also wives should and everything to their husbands. And I think I already see the parallel, right? Like the church submitting to a loving act.
Yeah.
It is a
It's
loving act. And and I can tell you that that loving act can be difficult. I remember a sermon from one of our preachers at our home church. He's now the senior minister, Mr. Jason Galley. And this sermon stuck with me, and he's not there, but he can hear me and he knows this. Jason Galley did a sermon. I was a teen. And I vividly still remember this sermon, and it's probably been about 13. Um, and this sermon was about sacrifice. It was about how love is sacrifice. Um, and he told a story about his kids, and one of them like gave up their money so the other one could do like the petting zoo at the mall. I don't remember all of it, but he talked about how he had the money to let the older child go and do it too. But that was such a moment for him to learn that sometimes you have to lose for others to gain, and that's okay. Because Jesus lost and we've gained that and all of those things, right? And I mean, 13 years later, there are moments when I'm struggling with this submission that sermon pops in my head, like the conviction for me to settle.
yeah. And this is why we talk about a biblical worldview. Um,
Yeah,
we live in a society now, especially here in the United States, where even the idea of submitting to any person is looked down upon.
yeah.
Heck, it's even from
I
a
don't need no
business,
man. Sorry.
even on a business standpoint, let alone a relational one, submitting to someone and even using that word submit
It's
uh, is
like
a
I said,
charged word now.
it is. Like I said, my social worker brain like immediately goes, hmm? But my biblically based Christian wife mom brain goes, there is beauty in that.
There is, and it is teased pretty hard in the first set of text that you read. The Christ is head of the church, and Paul continues that narrative through. Funny part is the part about husbands and what
Is
they need to be
longer.
doing is double, if not
You
more,
yeah,
than the wives.
you guys get so much more instructions than us. Ours is really love your husband, right? As you love church loves Jesus. So love your husband and follow. Like follow where he's and in verse 25, we're going to jump into what husbands have to do. And it says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church."
And gave himself up for her.
I know, but I like that line in itself. I'm pausing. I know that's not the
Oh
whole
yeah.
verse. But
Well,
like,
no, no, no. I
yeah,
wanted to continue hammering in that
I
home
know. Like,
as
and
yeah,
I mean everything.
as Christ loved the church, you love your wife. How did Christ love the church? Died for it.
Yep. That he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Your job, I don't know if you just read this, is not only potentially die for me, but it is to meet my needs in every way and make me better as a person, as a Christian, as a believer.
It is my responsibility to you and into extension the family dynamic as a whole so that when we as a family individually however it shakes out when we come before God on day of judgment is to help make sure you are the best version of you can be.
Yep.
That and that's not to say that like
I'm not
there's a
amazing.
threshold
I know I'm
that there's
amazing.
yeah, I also need to probably preface this that there's not necessarily a threshold of salvation. Salvation comes from the blood of Christ alone. Um, but we are called to continue in a walk in a journey And part of the responsibility of the husband is to not only take care of himself, but to make sure that his wife and family is on the correct path in their walk with Christ.
Yep. So in 28, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. And I think that verse gets so forgotten. And I think I- I'm going to continue. For no one has ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. We are members of his body. And so, like, that part there of love your wife, I think often people, this goes back to that submission part, right? And what love looks like. Um, and this is where dynamics are different. Like, we've seen many different marriages, but I can tell you, in all of them, we have seen this despite them all looking different. Because people have different love languages, people receive and accept love in different ways. And like, I have grown into submission. I think in my early years, that was a bigger battle than it's become now. I mean, like this move, you're like, I think we should quit. When I say I have reservations, I had reservations.
Yeah,
In fact, I think I said no a year ago. Downright, I don't want to. Um, and then this year it was it, that submission is coming in of more of, if you think this is where God wants us, I'll deal with my crap, and we'll like we'll do it. We'll do it. Um, but I can tell you, I mean, moving truck is like next week, and I still have nerves about this
yeah,
transition. Like I'm still kind of like, "Mm." But the submission part's become easier because you've always listened, and I've never questioned whether you actually considered what I was saying. I know you do. I've seen you wrestle with, this is her thoughts, this is her feelings. Where does God want this? How can I make sure I'm honoring her, but most importantly, honoring God and helping her come along? And
yeah,
so the submissions become easier because I've grown in that trust with you of, I don't have to question that you're not loving me, that you're not going to love the kids, that you're not going to make sure we're provided for. Um, because you do all the other things. To be quite honest, the submission comes easy. Whereas if you didn't do all the other things, it's hard to submit.
right. And part of that is using the same optics that, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. I I find it so difficult at times to even consider the idea of making certain decisions without either your input or your wants and needs in mind, because we are now two halves of a whole. That I mean,
I mean, that's the next verse I didn't read
it's
if you
literally the
want to
next
go
word.
into
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he quotes Genesis. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ in the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself. Let the wife see that she respects her husband. You just, in your own words, you practically said that.
Yeah. I mean, I've read it before a few times actually. But, but, and I think we've been married long enough that the respect is easy. I think I respected you early on into our dating relationship. I mean, we were young. Many people didn't think, I mean, because we were 19 when we got married and we started dating at 14 and 15, were those kids that nobody thought would last. Um, but very early on, I respected you. I would say I didn't respect your decision making, quite honest. Probably until about the time we were getting, um, because you were still kind of goofy and you were so funny, so funny. Um, but I think I viewed you as kind of goofy and fun to be around, and I loved that about you, and I wanted that in my life. But to be honest, at 19 when we got married, I was not ready to honor five. Not.
And I don't think I was up to Ephesians 5 standards as a husband at all. There were a number of things, that decisions that you sought for me to help with, and I definitely failed because I, on a maturity level, was just not there. On a spiritual level, I was not there.
Paul
Um,
was any book written by Paul was your favorite New Testament.
yeah. And so I think in our stages of dating, courting, marriage, all of that has been a continual conversation and growth in both submission and sacrifice. Um, and how that dynamic has shifted back and forth just a little bit. But ultimately, we try and have the Ephesians 5 optics.
I think back, and I think it was your it was Randy. I don't know what his name is. Randy Garris, amazing man, mentor at Ozark. And when we say Ozark, we're talking about Ozark Christian College out in Joplin, Missouri. If you're looking for a great Bible college, we are not sponsored, but oh my gosh, they're amazing, and we love the humans who run that place. We love the humans who trust Jesus there, and amazing, and women and ministry and all the things. But I think it was him talked about neither one of us can give 100% of the time. Was that him?
So I'm pretty sure he probably said something around that. I do constantly remember this is also an example of me making very poor decisions early on in our dating relationship. This was true life advice that was given to us by a carney who was giving us dating advice while also swindling me out of $20 after $20,
I
trying
think
to
you
win
lost
you a prize.
$200 that day. It's
I'm
unfair.
I I in a poor sense of judgment, trying to impress the girl I'd been wanting to date for a while.
We weren't even dating. We were married at this
Were we
point.
married?
We
Were we
were
married by that point?
married. That's what makes it so much worse.
It to tell you that I did not make the best decisions in a lot of different ways early on in our marriage. This is a prime example. And I'd still think that this is solid advice, right? Like the family and marital dynamic ultimately needs to hit 100% to function properly. But even as you mentioned, there are some stages in life where one of us can't get that even keel 50-50,
I mean,
even if
no.
that's the standard.
No, I mean there are days, and I think we've had them, like we talk about it and we recognize our seasons when we're in sync with each other and everything is flowing. And we talked about like 2 weeks ago, I think we were both snipping at each other. And you're not a snippy person. I'm a snippy person. I'm the hothead in the relationship. I will gladly own that and I work on it. But we were both snipping, and I think we both paused about the same time and we just looked at each other and said, we're out of sync. Like, I'm not meaning to come across the way I am, and you're not meaning to come across the way you are. And we both just need to take a minute and acknowledge our grace to each other. And I think back to 2018 us, who had just had E, and we weren't there. I would not have told you, hey, you, I don't know if you meant that way. I think I would have just shut down and
Yeah.
cried, to be honest.
I think and it hurts, thinking about 2018 post E. Uh,
Post E, I think there was also some postpartum with me that went undiagnosed while I was doing all the things, to be
yeah.
honest. Like, I was not in a good place either. It was not as bad as it was there. And with
Okay.
who knows, because COVID. Oh, Jay.
J and L. Yeah. There is, but I do think us going through that, and then finally when we came out of all of that, came this once again a growth dynamic in conversation of, hey, we need to make sure we're open when we feel out of sync.
Yeah. And acknowledging, like, I think, I mean, the communication has gotten so much better. And I think we breathe it easier now. And I'm not scared of rejection anymore. And that took a long time. I don't know why 7 years into our marriage is how long it took for me to not be fearful that in some way I would be rejected for saying something. Um, but it did. It was within this past year that suddenly I'm like, I can say whatever I want, and he's not gonna kick me out
And I also
or
think
like
part of
love me less. Like that. You're genuinely. has always been in the back of my mind of like, right? And like, I think we finally reached for like, I don't have a doubt. And I think that's helped me also in my relationship with God because I always have that feeling in the back, right? Like,
Yeah.
we'll get into the doer episode because I'm a doer and like earning grace, and so like in the past year, I finally found that place where I can just be like, or you make a joke and you're like, oh, wait, not in a joking mood, are you? And being able to be like,
Yeah.
no, I've had a rough day. I really don't like, I know you're trying to be kind. I know. And I've even told you, like, I know you're trying to be funny, but my temper's this big right now.
Yep. And a lot of that does stem from me finally getting myself to where I think I am getting better at reaching the husband that is thought to be in Ephesians 5, a sacrificial husband who's what he can for the betterment of us and for the betterment of you and for the betterment of the family. And that took a long time for me to do because I've had a young guy's mentality for a long time. I still think it comes out a lot. Um, but I am starting to have that dynamic of not just listening to you, taking it into consideration, but also as I listen to myself and what my body needs on a spiritual, physical, mental level, what you need on a spiritual, physical, and mental level, um, and how our love languages put into play in the whole
Yeah.
dynamic. Um, I I now feel way more attuned to looking at it. I know I noticed both cameras are getting low. Um, the last few minutes might be cameras off, but that's okay. Overall, um, yeah, it's gotten more natural to be able to see both of our needs and wants in that respect, and I think that's helped played a role into making sure both of our dynamics are feeling and having that open communication with one another.
So all this to say is like we're not perfect. Absolutely not. And we're still growing. We've been married 8 years. We know people have been married 30, 40, 50, whatever. And so I think I want to include a couple of tools for people who are watching us. The Love Nudge app is an amazing tool. That's where we started when we were first beginning this journey of communication and understanding how we love. And that helps you identify your love languages. Um, and love languages change. I think that's something nobody really told us, but there have been times where my love language has been service and like I need you to do the dishes. And honestly, that will make my day. And then there has been times where my love language is I need the words of affirmation. And so I think at one point we don't do it anymore because I think we're pretty good at now we can openly communicate our needs. But at one point it was really nice to have this app that connected to you and it kind of told you what I needed. And like every 6 months we retook the what's your love language quiz. And this app is free as far as I know. So amazing. Um, and it connects with your partner and it gives you ideas what
Yeah,
to do, which I think for you was more helpful than me. Um, but it also helped me understand because you're a touchy feely guy. That's your love language is you need touch. And that's not like a sexual nature. You just, you need like a shoulder pat or a hug or something like you need me to touch and show you I love you. Not in a weird way. Um, but anyway, but that helped me understand why you were touching me all the time because it drove me, and you know I'm not a big PDA person.
yeah,
It drove me nuts when we were dating. Like I'll hold your hand, I'll give you a hug, but like I don't want you touching me all the time. And so understanding like if I initiate it, quite honest, less when I don't want to be touched. But I then understood it wasn't you being handsy and of that sexual nature. It was just like I just touch me. Um, which is why like sitting on the couch, legs on your legs and watching TV, you're content.
yeah,
And I'm content because you're with me. And I can be reading my book and you could be watching a movie and we're happy.
yeah.
I don't think I used to understand why you were so okay with that.
Yep.
Like, shouldn't you want something? And the expectation. So, love nudge. If you don't have it and you feel like you need to open some communication in your marriage, that's a great tool. Um, Otherwise, diving into your Bible together, we're not good at this. I'm gonna call us out right now. We're not good at diving into the Bible together. Um, in our chaotic life, I think we both do it individually, but together, something we personally need to be challenged on to work out more. But I think that's another spot. And looking specifically for scriptures relating to marriage and growth within marriage and community. The Bible app got plans for you.
Yeah.
Find one. Check it out. If you don't like it, you got questions, reach out to your minister. Like, and if you're not connected with a church, connect with a church. Find someone, find a family of believers. Start in a small group if you're more comfortable with that. There's nothing wrong with that. You need people to do life with. That's important. God calls us to do that. Do it.
Yep.
That's my encouragement.
There you go.
I felt a Grace Jones presence take over with the God tells you to do it moment. I don't know if you did, but that's what I heard in my head was her voice.
Nice.
Yeah.
I will offer a little another little thing that you could use.
Absolutely.
Um, one of my we live in a business type culture here in the United States, and so we all check our emails, maybe a little too much sometimes.
Constantly. Right now,
Constantly.
checking it.
So there is I get a personal daily scripture reading and prayer on top of Bible, the Bible apps daily verse of the day that I've been doing. But also, there's this thing, I don't know exactly how you get a hold of it, but I recommend it if you can find it. It's called Marriage After God, and it is through the email I get it through is from Aaron and Jennifer Smith, as far as I'm aware, a good Christian
Oh,
married
they have a
couple.
podcast.
They do have podcasts. Awesome. So I get these every now and then. I believe they're daily, and once again, something that we should be doing more of together, but we don't. Calling each other out, uh, calling us out in the middle of podcasting. That this is a really fun resource. Every day it gives a prayer to pray to or with your spouse, along with um, a, a 1 year marriage prayer devotional that you could get.
And it's $25. You can order it off of their website.
Yep. So, I mean,
We'll put the link down below if you want to hop on there and order that. I think actually we're going to order that, and
I think
uh,
that'd be really good.
I was going to order it, but my phone is dead, and I have to have my shop key password to get into it.
Yeah. I'll also try and remind myself, you, Jordan, who was editing this, also make sure you add, it's called 5lovelanguages.com.
Yes,
Because if you didn't know, there are primarily 5 love languages.
which is connected to the Love Nudge app.
Yes.
Yep.
And so all of the things that we can do with that. Um, yeah. Overall, I think as a whole, the basis of a solid marriage is a wife who is open to submission to their husband, but a husband who is sacrificial to their wives.
I mean, that's a biblical marriage.
That's a biblical marriage, a
I mean,
submissive wife and a sacrificial husband.
that's not all that goes into a biblical marriage, but I think
Right.
that is possibly the foundation. Um,
Yep.
because ultimately none of the other stuff works if I'm not willing to submit and you're not willing to lead in Christ.
And that's also the key element is if the foundation's not in a Christ-centered marriage,
This is useless to you.
then the dynamics can
This
be
is
way off.
useless.
Yep.
Because ultimately Christ, because this goes back to our biblical worldview, right? Because I know you love Christ and I know Christ is what makes up your world and makes up your morals and your values and your things. I know that when I submit to you, I'm not submitting to an abusive, horrible human being who is going to make me do terrible things. Submitting to a man who loves God and is willing to follow him anywhere.
Exactly. There is a dynamic that it's a conversation. If you've ever read Kyle Adelman, I always recommend to anybody, even outside of marriages, that you DTR, that you determine the relationship, define the relationship, however you want to use that
Oh
phrase.
my gosh, I felt so old when you said that.
We read that in junior high.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
yeah. DTR. That was in his Not a Fan book, if I'm not mistaken. That's when you DTR your relationship with Jesus. Except I would also stretch that out to relationships and
Well,
with spouses.
I mean, so this is spouses, but when you talk about like the dating courting relationship, I
Oh
think
my
this is
gosh.
something that like marriage counseling, like premarital counseling really needs to hit on and understanding like the dynamics. I mean, we could go on for days about what premarital counseling should look like versus what it does. Um, but also like dating, it's good to have these communications. I do not encourage bunches of touching while you're dating. Um, I had a friend who said holding hands leads to babies, and she's not wrong. I mean, I vividly remember her. She's like, "You're holding hands, that leads to babies." And eventually it does. Now, I'm not saying you can't hold hands, but I am saying like
Gotta
when
DTR that thing.
when you're dating, what is your purpose in dating, especially for teenagers? Because to be honest, the purpose of dating is to find a spouse. And the thought of our children dating at the age we were dating terrifies me.
Oh
Like
yeah.
they're not ready for marriage. We weren't ready for marriage when we got married. Not that I would change it, but I'm like, oh, you can get down a slippery slope. But that's a podcast for another day.
That is that's like 3 or 4 podcast ideas we just gave ourselves within the first one.
Good.
Absolutely. When it comes to the idea of defining and constantly making sure your relationship is on the right track, you first have to have that Christ-centered foundation. If you're listening to this and you're trying to find good marital advice, like outside of the church, uh, I still recommend the Love Languages app because the idea of open communication and understanding how you and your significant other like communicate and receive and give love is absolutely important. But I think from a Christian perspective that if you don't have Christ at the center of it and the ultimate goal in your marriage is not to bring each other up to be better in Christ and to be closer to Christ and to share in that good news with others, then I think it's going to be hard. Uh, it's going to be hard. So, with that said, I do think that there is a foundation of Christ centeredness, submission, and sacrifice, and there's an ebb and flow to how that looks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it's submission to travel and move to a new state. Sometimes it's sacrifice, as in you're going to work a 12-hour shift overnight and then you're going to spend 3 more hours in a class, and then you're not going to get to bed till about noon.
It looks different for everyone. That's okay. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to message us. Also,
Oh,
if you don't
absolutely.
know Jesus, he loves you, and you should reach out to us and ask us questions because we have a Bible scholar here, right over there, who can answer your questions. If you have other things or questions you want us to do a podcast about, come to us, comment,
Absolutely.
like, comment, heart, subscribe. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what this is going on, but do it.
Wherever
Um,
you're finding us, because
wherever
I
you're finding
still,
us. But yeah,
yeah,
seriously. If you have questions or you want to know more about the Lord, that's what's most important to us. So ask us, or ask someone you trust who knows Jesus, part of a church, and has a community around it.
absolutely.
Yep. So we love you. We hope you have a great day, night, evening, whatever time you're watching this.
And we will see you guys later.